Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell. We're going to talk about Joseph Campbell being in Dungeons and Dragons canon, in my humble opinion, and then we're going to talk about how Dungeons and Dragons is finally free of Joseph Campbell's garbage monomyth. Ugh, eye roll. All right, let's get into this. All right, so first of all, let me talk about Joseph Campbell, who he was and what he meant, and boy did he have a moment in Dungeons and Dragons. It was about 5-10 years ago. Oh my gosh. All right, so let's get into who is, Joseph Campbell. Let's get right there. All right, so Joseph Campbell is he is this guy who came up with this concept of the monomyth. And it's the idea that every single myth throughout all, no matter where it is geographically and no matter where it is temporally, time. Geography is physical placement on the earth, and then time is placement within the history of humankind, right? So he's saying that all myths are essentially the same, right? And it was Cha Sitar, so that's a mnemonic. Let me see if I can get all the way through this. A hero has a call, then a hero, and so basically, they'll say Tolkien goes through all of these. So the hero has a call. Bilbo is called to adventure. He gets a helper, Gandalf, and then Sitar challenges. They faced many challenges. Transformation. Bilbo is transformed, right? He's no longer just this little hobbit who sits in the Shire, smoking his pipe and trying to get a good lunch. He's transformed and he wants more, right? And then atonement, he has to atone for the things that he's done, right? And then return, right? So it's a call to adventure, it's a helper, right? It is they'll face challenges. The hero themselves will be transformed. They'll have to atone, and then they will return home, right? And then some people, this is the dial on this is turned a little bit here, a little bit there, and this is no small thing. Like, this thing had literally 1,000 dissertations written about it, and 5-10 years ago, people would not shut up about it when it came to Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason why they were interested is they wanted to understand. They're like, oh, just another derivative. Actually, they were saying that these weren't derivative, that essentially we could tell the same story over and over and over again, and there could still be meaning and purpose into them. And that also they were saying that, like, all these myths were essentially just the same people from all over the world telling the same story, right? And I'll tell you right now, I never liked this theory. I thought the monomyth theory is absolute garbage junk. I don't think it's true. I think that each nation, each sovereign people, they have their own stories, and if there's some similarities between them, that's okay. But the reality is, even the slight nuances between them is where you can focus and get value. And Campbell wanted to just kind of brush that away, right? And so, I think the monomyth is utter garbage, and I never bought into it, and it was constantly talked about 5-10 years ago, where dungeon masters were like, you make sure you understand the monomyth, and then you're going to take your characters through the monomyth, make sure you hit each one of the beats, right? And your execution is what's important. Or there were people saying, oh, here's the monomyth, so we need to subvert it, right? And what's interesting about subversion is interesting. Okay, so you understand a thing, and now you're going to subvert the thing. What I think is really interesting, and I think what the OSR and the indie don't get, is it's not enough to subvert a thing, right? Anybody can subvert a thing, introvert it and invert it, or do something different. Can you beat the thing with your inversion? If you can't, nice try, right? Like, what you did didn't really matter, right? Subverting a thing, but not defeating the thing in commercial success and cultural success, and it's not valuable, right? And so I think that's important. Like, if you're like, oh, I'm gonna subvert it, I'm gonna invert it, I'm gonna go against the flow, that's great. But if you impress 4 people and the thing you're trying to beat still impresses 4,000 people, you didn't win, right? So I think that's important to understand. But one thing I think is really quite interesting is, so I don't know if you know this, but Joseph Campbell is now literally Joseph Campbell, the man, right, is canon in Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you can put Joseph Campbell as a professor in Strixhaven. Yep. Right? And Strixhaven is canon in D&D. Now, how could you do that, right? Well, I'm telling you, people are not paying attention, right? Season 6 of Rick and Morty just dumped a whole bunch of really important things into the canon of Dungeons and Dragons, in my humble opinion. Here's how that works, okay? Dungeons and Dragons, D&D canon hardbacks. You know them, you love them, right? You know they're canon, right? Starter sets are canon, all right? Like, that's really important to understand. There is a Dungeons and Dragons starter set, Rick and Morty set, that is still selling, still on shelves today, canon. And guess what? So what does that mean? It means what's in the Rick and Morty show is canon to Dungeons and Dragons, logically, by narrative, logic, lore, promotion, packaging, in my humble opinion. Every single thing that shows up in Rick and Morty, any episode, is canon to Dungeons and Dragons, because the Rick and Morty characters are canon in Dungeons & Dragons. They're right there. They're canon, right? And so Joseph Campbell was literally just put into a Rick and Morty episode in Season 6. It was a very bad meta episode. And that's a whole discussion, too, of like what really happened with Rick and Morty Season 6. But I'll keep focused here. So Joseph Campbell and the Monomyth are now literally canon and can be discussed literally in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign logically. Right, like you don't need to stretch it. It's not some weird, unusual story you're telling. It's literally D&D canon, right? So, in my humble opinion, by logic, narrative, lore, promotion, packaging, canon matters, right? And I understand this is really weird, right? But that's my entire point is, I think 10, 20 years from now, people will be writing about how Dungeons and Dragons managed canon in a way that no other intellectual property in the world spread its canon. And that's the other issue is, I think what people really don't understand is they don't understand what Dungeons and Dragons has accomplished in canon. Dungeons and Dragons has connected itself to more worlds than any modern intellectual property ever, right? So this video summarized, Monomyth was always garbage. I'm so glad Dungeons and Dragons is finally free of a million podcasters, just trying to say, oh, you just need to run the Monomyth in your D&D. It's so tired and played out. And I think that's another reason why he did show up in Rick and Morty Season 6 and is now canon to D&D, is his moment is past. And it was just kind of like a remembering of something that we were all very foolishly enamored with, right? And I think the thing is, what we can move forward with now is we can talk about modern myth, and we can really kind of start to free ourselves from Greek mythology and free ourselves from this, from Joseph Campbell's very played out view of understanding myth all overall. I think it was important that he did what he did at the time. I think we gave him too much credit, and we need a new Joseph Campbell at this point. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Joseph Campbell's Monomyth, how it connects to Dungeons & Dragons when you get in the comments, and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.